This is Hydroid, and he has been consistently at the very bottom of every Warframe tier list for years. But with the recent update, he not only got better, he literally jumped right into top tier, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I haven't had this much fun with Warframe for a long time. So in today's guide, we're gonna take a look at what Hydroid can do, how he's able to effortlessly nuke whole rooms of Steel Path enemies, and of course, I'm gonna show and explain all the builds that allow him to be that strong. A massive shout out to all my generous channel members who help me keep the lights on, and now let's jump right into it. Now, I know that Hydroid's been around for a long time, but since a lot has changed with his abilities, let's first go over all of them and see how they work after the update. Starting out with his passive, which is already super nice. See, usually when you deal a corrosive status effect against an armored enemy, then the first effect will take away 26% of their armor, and every subsequent proc another 6%, totaling a 80% armor reduction at the maximum of 10 corrosive status effects. Hydroid, however, reduces enemy armor not by 26, but 50% with the first corrosive proc, allowing him to full strip enemies on just corrosive alone. And as we will see, that's also exactly what his kit revolves around and why he's so Steel Path viable now. But let's look at his other abilities now. His first skill, Tempest Barrage, creates an area with a 10-meter radius where it'll start to rain, and all these raindrops explode on impact, staggering enemies and deal corrosive damage with a guaranteed status effect. With Hydroid's passive, this alone can full strip the armor of hordes of enemies all at the same time. And the best thing about it, you can cast as many of these rain fields as you like. This skill also comes with an augment, which makes it deal viral status effects on top of the corrosion, and it's Hydroid's helmet ability. This is great. The second skill, though, is not really. Tidal Surge turns you into a wave, dashing forward, pulling nearby enemies with you, and they receive corrosive effects during this process too. Now, this one was pretty much unplayable in the past, and while the wave is now more steerable, I still think it's kinda clunky and not that useful in many situations. I mean, yeah, it gives you status cleanse and it's also kinda like Rolling Guard now, but to be honest, I think this is the one to replace with something better from the helmet. Hydroid's 3 though is nothing less than amazing. Plunder gives you a metric buttload of armor and additional corrosive damage onto your weapons and abilities. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. Now, the ability's description here is a bit misleading though. It says you plunder enemy armor, however, it actually doesn't take away any armor from your foes. What it really does is it takes the corrosive effects away from them and gives you the damage and the armor based on that, while also freezing the enemy's armor value, so even though they lose the corrosion, they'll still don't get their armor back. Oh yeah, and it only works on enemies in your line of sight and not really when they're not on screen. It's kinda difficult to explain and sounds very complicated. However, the key take-home message here basically is have a lot of enemies on your screen, then press 3 and you'll be fine. Plunder also has an augment that heals you and your allies, but I feel like it's only really worth it if you have a free mod slot at the end and really nothing else to put here. And finally, his fourth ability, Tentacle Swarm, is a real blast too. It locks down a huge area of the map with tentacles, grabbing enemies, lifting them into the air, so they're completely out of the fight. Also, they do take corrosive damage over time with guaranteed status effects. About this one, there's really not a lot to say. It's absolutely amazing for crowd control and defense type missions. By the way, that's also why the gameplay footage in this video is overwhelmingly recorded in mobile defense missions, simply because Hydroid makes them so easy to solo. Also, the augment mod, Pilfering Swarm, doubles enemies' drop rate, so that can be nice for dedicated resource farming runs, but not necessarily in day-to-day combat. Now, before we look into his playstyle, I would be super happy if you could maybe spare a like if you think that I deserve it, because it really helps with the algorithm getting the video in front of more Tenno out there. Thank you so much for your support, and now let's go on. So, with the abilities out of the way now, how would your standard Hydroid gameplay look like? Well, what we need to understand is Hydroid is very much a crowd control frame, albeit one who deals a crapload of damage at the same time. Since his third ability grants you so much additional damage and armor, you pretty much want to try and keep this one on all the time. It's really insane. Next will be the strategic use of your first and fourth skill. What I mean by that is, his 4 completely locks down the area you cast it on. Nobody's gonna get through. So you best cast it on one entrance of the room to be fine from that side. In smaller rooms, you could also just as well cast it in the middle, and that would be alright too. Now, more interesting here is his first though. While the amount of damage, armor strip, and with the augment, viral application is absolutely insane already, you shouldn't underestimate just how good of a crowd controlling ability this also is. Enemies stumble around helplessly with all the raindrop explosions. So if you cast one of these rain fields at each room door, nobody's gonna get in except maybe your occasional eczemas, and you can freely patrol the area, pick enough enemies as you go. I am honestly just amazed by this ability, and I think we're gonna see it on more and more Helminth builds in the future. My favorite weapon with Hydroid, by the way, would be the Proboscis Cernos, because you can effectively use it to pull more enemies into your rain fields. The rain is then gonna go and strip all their armor away, and ideally, they'll be full stripped before the Cernos' projectile explodes, because this explosion deals pure viral damage, which gets a fat 75% bonus on unarmored health. It's just absolutely ridiculous, as you also see in the footage in the background. Now, when it comes to survivability, Hydroid, just like Daggeth, can health tank as well as shield gate. So as we talk about the modding now, I'd like to first go over optimizing Hydroid's abilities, because it's pretty much the same on both builds, and then we take a look at what you have to add to be able to shield gate or health tank respectively. So let's go. First of all, Aura and Excellence slot are pretty much personal preference. I chose Corrosive Projection to further support the armor stripping, and Primed Sure-Footed for the convenience, but as I said, you can do whatever you like here. Now, Hydroid first and foremost wants ability strength. It increases the damage from your 1, skyrockets the effects of your 3, and, as we'll see in a minute, it's also going to help with both survivability methods. So, we go with Umbral Intensify and Blind Rage. In case you have problems with your energy, then replacing Blind Rage with Transient Fortitude would be a good option, and you can also think about maybe adding Mold Augmented or Augur Secrets on top of that for even more ability strength. Next, let's look at our energy economy. As always, if you have Arcane Energize, great, go for it, absolutely, you will be fine. If not, then Streamline for at least a bit of efficiency is not a bad idea either, maybe even Archon Shards, and in case you need further ways to regain energy, then this guide right here might be helpful too. Oh yeah, and Flow or Prime Flow for a higher energy pool, of course. Now, with that taken care of, we definitely add the Augment mod Viral Tempest for Hydroid's first skill, because the viral application it gives us is just invaluable. And finally, let's also talk about range and duration. Now, how much of this you want very much comes down to personal preference, but I think the best would be to not overdo it here. Go with 1 range and 1 duration mod and you will be fine. I personally went for stretch and prime continuity, but also the non-prime version will absolutely be okay. And this right here would be the skills part of your build. Let's now look into how we can keep Hydroid alive even against very strong enemies. First off, Hydroid comes with 650 shields by default. That's a lot, and basically it means that he's tailor-made for the new shield gating meta. So let's look at that first. The new shield gating dictates that having 1150 shields or more makes you invincible for a fat 2.5 seconds when the shields break. So we add redirection, ending us up at 1300, which is more than enough. But how do we now refill them to the max in just 2.5 seconds? Well, this would be where the Helminth comes into play, and basically we have 2 options here, Harrow's Condemn or Hildren's Pillage. Now, as you might know, I am a huge sucker for Condemn because it's just so quick and intuitive and easy, and I think it is the ideal shield gating skill for Hydroid. But I have also tried Pillage on him too, and while it wasn't as consistent as I would have liked, it's certainly possible and even ideal if you intend to go against Corpus because it can strip shields. And that's already it for the shield gating. This is how the full build looks like for both Pillage and Condemn. By the way, quick tip here, in case you want to highly invest into your Hydroid, you could replace Redirection with 2 blue Tau-Forged Archon shards to free up this one mod slot for something else. But I know many of you dislike shield gating, so let's also look at health tanking now. Believe me, I have done a lot of testing here, because I didn't want to have to resort to subsuming Sevagoth's Gloom, since it's pretty much what every HP build does. But unfortunately, there's just no way around it. Even with Arcane Grace for constant healing and over 5,000 armor, you just get completely shredded in mere seconds. So we add Adaptation, replace Mold Augmented with Arcane Blessing for more health, and then, well, Gloom it is. It works fine, enemies can pretty much do nothing, and you'll be chillin'. However, I also gotta say, it doesn't quite feel as rewarding to play as the shield gating method. This would be the build for health tanking, and also one word about Archon shards. If you want to add some, then I suggest at least 1 Tau-Forged yellow one for more cast speed, that's gonna come in really handy, and the rest is pretty much up to personal preference. I like strength, maybe also some duration. But the Hydroid rework is of course not the only thing that came with the recent update. So if you haven't seen it yet, you absolutely gotta check out my guide on the new Warframe Dagoth, because she is absolutely insane. Another massive shout out to Akimbo Fade, Niels V, Flamies, Demon Lord Zell, and all other generous channel members for all your support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.